Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Susanne van der A, and together with Miranda Nijenhuis, we are hosting this customer experience podcast for you. I combine a PhD in customer experience with 20 plus years of experience in CX transformation internationally, and my goal is to share my knowledge so we can enhance the quality of CX programs in as many organizations as possible across the globe. Yes, I know, it's a tiny dream, but come on, let's at least try to change the world together. Miranda has been my partner in crime for the last 8 years, working together on many CX programs. In this series, she will be interviewing me on CX topics that are top of mind in most organizations we work with.
All right, Zanna,
Yes.
it's our first CX Energy Boost podcast. Boop, 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 boop. And we're going to talk about setting your CX compass. What do you mean by this?
Well, I think in the essence what I mean with a compass is to just have the day-to-day context of an organization. Every employee is super busy, right? I have 1,000 things to do.
Yep.
But if I know exactly where I can have the biggest impact for customers, and I really like the word that one of the employees mentioned. She said it gives me laser focus. So for me, setting a CX compass is knowing exactly what do I need to improve to have the biggest impact in enhancing the experience of our customers.
Yeah. And a lot of companies are struggling with this, right? What are they struggling with?
Well, I think the key things that they are mentioning is that, I think it's two things. One is, hey, I'm not seeing any effect, right? So I'm measuring net promoter score or satisfaction, right? The metric doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And it either takes very long before I see something, or I'm not seeing anything, let alone connected to financial impact. That's one issue. And the other issue is, okay, we're measuring something, but we don't really know what is the biggest driver, right? So which button can I push the most effective to have the fastest impact on increasing satisfaction?
Yeah.
So they're measuring something, but they don't feel like I'm in the driving seat of improving customer experience.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So setting up the compass is 3 steps, right? First one is choose the right metric for the right experience.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on this?
Yeah, so what I saw a few years ago already is that when you talk about customer experience, it's such a broad field that you tend to sort of drown in the swamp, right?
Yeah.
And for example, if you're talking with a UX person, they will also talk about it's not just UX, it's customer experience that we're doing. The call center is saying, hey, but we are also in customer experience. And it's not that they're not correct, right? It's a valid point, but it's just not helping to not have the same language. So I chose to start working, I think 3 or 4 years ago, with the 5 types of experience. And this is not set in stone, right? It's not black or white. But what I see is that it really helps to create at least the same language.
Yeah.
But also to see, okay, because each type of experience is also different department in the organization. So to really understand, okay, what's what, who is responsible for what, and in the end, of course, you need to connect the 5 to have real transformation. So the 5, the first is brand experience. So brand experience to me is your reason of being, right? It should tell you, okay, why, and what's my core added value? What's my sense of purpose as an organization? And it should be your guide for everything else. Should be, right? Because often it's not. But if my brand promise is around personal attention, my journeys should be designed very differently than if my brand promise is about ease or speed. Should, because often it's more of an external, right, marketing communication, but it's not translated to journeys.
Yeah.
And for each type of experience, you have a different metric. So I'll explain first the 5 types and then connect the metric. So brand experience, number 1. Then customer experience. So I define customer experience as from the moment I've decided to go to company X. And for example, I start with the web form to, buy a product. I use it until I leave. So all my journeys, that to me is customer experience.
Yeah.
And you want 2 things. You want to have them in line with your brand promise. and you want to find those drivers, those key buttons to push to have the best experience in each of the journeys. The third one is employee experience, which for me is the same as customer experience. So it starts from the moment I decided I'm going to apply for a job at company X. Now, how I get there, the same for customers, so how company X is even top of mind, that to me is a brand experience. Or for employees, it's employer branding, and that's often the name that's used. So for employee experience, the same. What are the journeys of the employees? Is it in line with our brand promise? And what are the key drivers for employee engagement? That was number 3.
It's a lot, right? We have it in writing as well.
Stay with us, please. Number 4, service experience. And I define that as the human channels. So a customer calls you, sends you an email or chats. And they're the same. You want to know, of course, everybody's measuring, for example, first time fix. And then I get the answer in one call. But there are more things, right? The employee, how did he treat you? So you want to have the drivers of that specific channel. But you also want to make sure, I tend to use an example of, let's say I'm Nike, and I call the call center of Nike. I don't even know if Nike has a call center, but just humor me. And if I would have to wait, I would expect, based on a brand promise, that let's say the tape I'm hearing is, for example, a super inspiring athlete saying something, right, to make my day. So make sure that also your service experience is aligned with your brand promise. And the last one, but not least, of course, is user experience. And also here, a lot of, let's say, true UXers will disagree with me making the definition super small. But I just see that that helps in organizations. So for me, UX is purely the digital side. So it's the website, it's the app.
Yeah.
And there the focus is, of course, about conversion, which is not my expertise. But the other part, connect experience, is really how do you make it as easy as possible. And in the end, you want to make sure that you connect the 5 together to have really transformation.
And there's not one holy metric, right?
No. Contrary to popular belief, for example, the Net Promoter Score, I don't know if you read the book of Reichheld, right? He's the author of the NPS. And the literal title of his book is The Ultimate Question. But that was pure marketing, because in his own book, he's the first person to say, hey, you need to have more metrics than just one. So when you look at the 5 types, and just so you know, we'll be making a podcast for each metric. So I'll just highlight the metric for each of the types. So for brand experience, it should be the NPS. That's for commercial companies. For government companies, in my opinion, NPS doesn't make any sense, because I cannot go to a different organization, right?
Exactly.
So there's the trust. In the end, you want to enhance trust. And also there you see this 8+. I'm just remembering the 8+. Maybe we should get back to that later. It's relevant to increase trust. So brand experience, NPS, or trust. Customer experience. So for each journey, you're finding the drivers of satisfaction. So how satisfied were you with buying product X, for example?
Yeah.
For employees, it's something that's called effective commitment. Because a lot of companies are measuring employee engagement. But 99 out of 100, at least from my perspective, are not measuring from a scientific perspective truly engagement. They are making a mix of satisfaction, the employee version of the Net Promoter Score, and then saying, hey, if we sort of average this, we have an engagement index. Well, that should also be a separate podcast, I'm afraid.
I think so.
So effective commitment is sort of my emotional connection to the company. It's questions like, I feel I belong to company X. Right? So it's really the soft side of the loyalty that I feel towards the organization. That's employee experience. Then service experience is 2 things. It's satisfaction. How satisfied were you with answering your question, for example?
Yeah.
But also first time right. So first time fix is something that's all customer centers are measuring, is do we answer a question in one call? And keep measuring that, right? That's a valid metric. But first time right is actually, am I preventing calls that also customers don't want to be making right, to your organization? And that's the question that we just put in a survey as well. The question is literally, dear customer, could we have prevented this call? Yes, no. And just as a side note, percentages are often between 20 and 30%. So if you're looking for a Speedy Gonzalez business case, this is the ultimate question. Damn, we got an ultimate question. Because then, okay, if 30% of my customers are already saying, I wouldn't, I'd prefer not to call you, times, 1 million calls per year, you have a super serious business case of 3 million to enhance your customer experience.
Yeah, exactly. So enhance the customer experience and a decrease in the calls you get, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Super win-win in customer contact. There's a lot of win-win and happier customers and more efficiency.
Yeah.
So that was the fourth one, service experience. Then user experience, of course, conversion. But as I already mentioned, that's not my expertise. But from an experience perspective, that's where the customer effort score comes in.
Yeah.
And the customer effort score is the question, how easy is it to do something? For example, the app made it very easy for me to, buy an extra product. Customer effort score will also be a separate podcast before we dive into that rabbit hole.
Let's wrap this one up, right? Okay, so that was the first step.
Yes.
Second step is get measurements for channels, journeys, and overall, right?
Yeah. So what you see is that I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, this terminology touch points really took off. And what I see is that it's not helpful for two reasons. Because touch point is sometimes a channel, and a channel for me is call, email, app, right? The channel of communicating. And a touch point can often be a channel, or it can be sort of one step in a journey. For example, a touch point can also be the account manager just visited me to discuss an offer. And the problem with that is twofold. If you're just measuring a touch point as part of a journey, you're missing my complete journey, as you think you're doing a very good job directly after that offer, but the rest of the whole journey is lacking. And what several, let's say, survey tooling companies are doing, they're saying, okay, but in this whole journey, you have 5 different touch points. So we measure 5 separate touch points, and then we report those 5 as being the journey.
Yeah.
But that's something very different from actually measuring the whole journey. So just be aware of that. And also what often happens is that when you measure directly after a touch point, let's use the contact center as an example. A lot of contact centers are measuring, as you just had the call, and then they ask you, could you stay on the phone? And then a computer voice asks you 2 or 3 questions. Which is super useful if you want to evaluate the employee, but it's not useful if you want to evaluate my service journey. Example. Let's say I'm calling a contact center because, I want the company to send me form X. Miranda, you pick up the phone, you say, yes, Anna, of course, no problem, I will send it to you right away. I'm super happy. I think, hey, perfect employee, perfect experience. So immediately after the contact, I will rate you a 9. I think there's always room to improve.
Okay.
But then, if the form never arrives, then my journey is not positive.
Yeah, exactly.
And that explains why a lot of companies are reporting super high NPS or satisfaction scores, but they're still struggling to either see financial impact or they still see their customers leave, right? Because it's just missing a big part of the journey.
Yeah. All right.
So we had channels, we had journeys, and a journey for me is, because that can also be a hype term, but journey for me is nothing else than the steps that the customer goes through with the organization. But then really from the outside in, so not the whole detailed internal procedure about invoicing, but just, okay, I receive an invoice, I pay the invoice, and that's
check.
That's part of my journey. Let's say the number of journeys for an organization should be relatively limited. So 8 to 10 journeys maximum. That's normally a good indication. So I, for example, in an insurance company, I buy the insurance. Maybe I have a claim. I have a question. Could be a journey. You get every year you get this new proposal of your insurance. And that's a journey step. So 8 to 10 steps. That should be the indication for your journeys. So we have the channels, you have the journeys, and the last one is something that's called like the overall score. So once a year, not every week, not every month, You just make a sample of, let's say, your average customer base, and you make sure that the percentage of new customers, existing customers are part of that sample. And then you have this sort of sanity check every year. Okay, with everything we're doing on the channels, with everything we're doing on the journeys, do we also see indeed an increase of our total NPS or satisfaction? And with these 3 elements, you are covering, let's say, all the elements that are needed to be in the driving seat of customer experience.
Cool. Sounds great. Last step.
Yes.
How do we find the real drivers?
Yes, and that's of course how do you? Well, I know the expression in Dutch. I cannot think quickly of the expression in English.
What's it in Dutch?
In Dutch is dat is het hele eieren eten.
Dat is het hele eieren eten.
That's the whole egg eating. So that's let's say the key, the key to everything, because all companies are measuring something, whether it's NPS or satisfaction or customer effort score. But how do you know for sure what really drives the NPS, or how can you enhance it the fastest way?
Yeah.
And there's also this trend toward asking one question and then open text, which of course was also the basics of the NPS. Would you recommend us? And then the question why. But analyzing open text is a risk for 2 reasons. One is that when you ask me directly, why do you give this score? I start rationalizing my answer. I start thinking, well, because Miranda was super friendly, or because it was a super speedy process.
Yeah.
But I started rationalizing my answer. While we as human beings are not super rational people, so you run the risk, and we've proven with data that not just a hypothetical risk, that even if, like the Qualtrics and the Medallia and the survey tooling companies say we have analytics engines that can analyze, thousands of open answers, you're still analyzing the rational answers. So the risk is that the customer is telling you what they think matters, but their subconscious latent needs, which is often more emotional, not transactional, that number 1 is actually very different. And if you're not aware of that, then you start analyzing your open text, and then a contact center maybe is again a concrete example. If you analyze the open text, then a lot of people complain about this choice menu, right? Press 1 for press 2 for exactly. Super annoying. So if you would analyze the open answer, you would think, oops, we either need maybe to kill this whole thing, which has huge operational impact, or at least we need to improve it.
Yeah.
While also as part of my PhD, we measured this, right? So we measured. It's freely available, not commercial. All yours if you want it. You can download it. And there the key is that you really. So in the analysis, we saw that choice menu, that IVR, has 0 impact.
Yeah.
So the biggest driver, and when you say this, everybody says, duh, right? The biggest driver is the employee, who's listening, who's friendly, giving the correct answer. But that's interesting, right? So after what we've done, 500,000, I don't know how many drivers analysis.
Something like that.
Across different countries, different branches, different organizations. And every time when you present the results, then people say, well, that's nothing new. We already knew this. Okay, but then why were you constantly improving the transactional stuff while the human aspect, the soft aspect, is your biggest driver?
Yeah.
So what did we learn from that, Miranda?
What did we learn from that?
That we now also always do first a quiz.
Of course. Yeah, the quiz.
Yeah, so when we present
really
the results, we're not just presenting the results. We first make a Kahoot quiz. So, okay, what do you think is the driver? And that's not just only fun, that's also a nice competition.
Yeah.
But that's really the aha moment where people say, oops, my assumptions maybe are not correct. And then they're really open to hear, okay, but what are these drivers telling me?
Yeah. And you were talking about speed on the one hand and emotional things on the other hand. So we really have to have a balance in that as well, right? The emotional and the functional.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do when we find those drivers, and just stop me if we're going too much in detail, because I think this should also be a separate podcast. Yeah, is indeed, so we build the whole survey. So after journey mapping in the workshop, we go through both the transactional steps in the process, but from a customer perspective,
Yeah.
not from an internal perspective. And at the end of the workshop, we also ask about, okay, but what emotional experience do you want the customers to have? Those two ingredients together, we mix up, to be explained later. And then we have the balance, so we have hard proof. Okay, in this case, yes, transaction is the number one. So we're not saying transaction is never the number one, but we're just testing it every time. What's in your context, in your journey, the biggest driver, so you can improve fast. And when I say improve fast, I also remember that across all those organizations, every time within 3 months, and we've seen, right, not just a 0.1 increase, but a serious 0.5 or even a 1, from a 7 to an 8. So it's not just us rambling about statistics.
It's really amazing.
It's proven, right, in practice that indeed it just works every time. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to the end of the podcast, right?
Okay.
I think we covered it. We have some new nice podcast topics.
In the pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe also about, because you talked a little bit about the open text, what can you do and don't do with the open text and with the complaints you get. You think we wrap it up?
I think let's wrap it up.
All right. So having all heard of this, we're really curious, what's the one key insight and action that you take from this podcast? Let us know, and hope to see you soon.
Ciao.
Ciao.